that God makes God's self weak in order to identify with the weak and oppressed is this beautiful image, whether one believes it or not. That's the call of humanness, is to be in solidarity with our neighbors because we all suffer. We're all born, we all die, and we suffer in between, and there's joy in between, but we're united in our fragility.
Hello, Damn Givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. I'm your host, Nick LaPara, and this is the show where we chat with people who saw something wrong in the world and gave a damn about it. We hope that you will listen, learn, and begin giving a damn in your world today, wherever you may be. We have a fantastic conversation for you today. Last week, I recorded a chat with Larycia Hawkins. She is currently a professor at University of Virginia, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about that. We spend most of our time chatting about the highly charged and very controversial thing she did in 2015. Spoiler alert, it shouldn't have been highly charged or very controversial, but here we are. In 2015, while she was a tenured professor at Wheaton College just outside of Chicago, Illinois. Recently, a documentary came out about what happened then and what has happened since then called Same God. And side note, through July 1st, you can rent it for 99 cents. I think it's Amazon Prime. Go check it out. Go Google it. You know how to use the Googles. So you should probably make that happen, friends. It is a fantastic documentary. And this is a great conversation. I truly, from the bottom of my heart, enjoyed it. Larycia has so much to teach us. Before we jump into our conversation today, I want to give a huge shout out to this week's sponsor. Y'all know that I'm very picky about who sponsors this show. They have to align very closely with my values in life and with the values of Let's Give a Damn. And this episode is brought to you by Red Kap, a fantastic company that makes workwear and uniforms. Not only is Red Kap a Nashville-based company, which I of course love because I live here right now, but they champion the men and women who are out there committed to making our communities thrive. Everything they make, from work shirts to coveralls, is crafted with purpose and on purpose. They are a no BS company. What you see is what you get, and what you're getting is a group of people who genuinely give a damn about work and about life and about those two things being done right. From July 1 through July 31, you can get 20% off your first purchase at redkap.com using the promo code GIVEADAMN. That's 20% off your first purchase at redkap.com with the promo code GIVEADAMN through July 31st. Side note, I also worked with them last month to interview amazing damn givers that are contributing beautifully to their communities during this global pandemic. You can see more about those conversations in that series called The Frontlines. You can see more of that at redkap.com/community. That's redkap.com/community. Red Kap, thank you so much for believing in our show, and thank you so much for all the amazing things you do in this world. And you, if you want to help us continue to do what we do, go buy something from them. They're amazing products. Many of you probably work in different fields and industries where you could use these amazing clothes. Okay, let's get started, shall we? Here's my conversation with the incredible Larycia Hawkins. Let's go. Larycia Hawkins, thank you so much for joining me on the Let's Give a Damn podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Fantastic. We have so much to dive into. Let's start with this. It is Juneteenth, what should be national holiday that most Americans, or I should say most white Americans, don't know about. They weren't taught it in school because most schools teach a very sanitized version of history, especially those of us that had a kind of right-wing fundamentalist Christian education. Juneteenth was definitely never mentioned in there because in there they heralded people like Christopher Columbus as great discoverers. And so we definitely weren't going to hear about Juneteenth. So I'm very pleased to be recording this with you on Juneteenth. And what do you feel about Juneteenth? Do you feel supported as a Black woman in America? Do you feel supported by this day? I know that kind of one of my beefs, I guess, with this day is that A, it's not a national holiday already, and B, 1862, slavery was abolished. 1865 was really abolished when the last slaves got word of it in Texas. But we're really still experiencing slavery because of the 13th Amendment. Like, it never went away. It just changed forms as we're kind of, framing it these days. So how do you feel about this day?
Right. That's a complicated question to answer because, I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you asked is, how do I feel about Martin Luther King Jr. Day? I should say Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because without the Reverend and the Doctor, we forget the totality of who he was and is, right? And while I'm kind of too young to remember all of the fighting within state and national legislatures, from like actually paying attention in the paper. I remember when it became a holiday. So
Sure.
Let's be clear about that. I just wasn't privy to all of the back and forth. I sensed that there was some racist reason that people didn't want to make it a holiday. And I grew up hearing these arguments about, well, he had an affair, Anyway, that's how I feel. Like, it's American tokenism. This is something that is for us and by us, that we have known about, but that this kind of white epiphany, like, oh my gosh, like, let's celebrate this. Well, I have colleagues at universities that declared this a holiday and said, oh yeah, Friday you have off now. But by the way, there's graduation. And so the Black and brown folks who are working to make sure graduation goes off without a hitch, the Black professors who want to be there for their students, have a decision. Are they there for their students? Or are they absent? And that's how the US works,
yes.
Right? These kind of token acknowledgements of American, and I say American in quotes because obviously that too is a misnomer. Sins, and again, I should say not sins, but that's the nomenclature. It's not my accounting of it,
Right.
Because I think we make it too easy for people when we just chalk slavery up to the America's original sin. Well, by the way, the genocide of the Native peoples is the original one. So, anyway.
So, like all things, it is very complicated how to feel, about it. I mean, I feel as a, I'm Latino, but so I'm not white, but I do, every time Black History Month comes around, that feels to me like another way to kind of pat Black people on the head and say, see, we're acknowledging all the shit we did, sort of, kinda, because we have excuses for why things happened. And in so many slave owners like treated their slaves so well, and we rationalize our way through it. But here, we'll give you a full month, so like, stop whining. Look what we're doing for you, right? And so it goes back to that token nature of these holidays, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. If Juneteenth becomes a national holiday, Black History Month, and yet you would think that if year after year having these special days to remember these special people and moments in time, or horrible moments in time rather, you would think that we would get better. You would think that we would make the changes necessary, and yet we're not. We're still dealing with, and we'll talk about so many things in this conversation. We're still dealing with them. That to me is mind-boggling, that we say we're for not just equality, but equity. And we're for, recognizing the amazing things that Black people have done and all that they've come through and this and that and the other. And yet we're still dealing with systemic racism. We're still dealing with the preschool to prison pipeline. We're still dealing with, I've had so many white men, it's all been white men the past 3 weeks, say like, well, redlining isn't a problem anymore. It's so far in the past. And it's like, just because you abolish something, just because you say this isn't legal anymore, doesn't mean that it stops happening.
I've got a recent study from the city of Chicago that proves otherwise. Otherwise.
Right. It's still those lines are still very much drawn. And so, yes. So, to kind of sum up what I think your answer was, like, it's complicated. Like,
well, it's complicated, and it's complicated. And I also want to say it's a damn slap in the face. So let's give a damn, right?
yep.
It's a slap in the face. It feels like not just a token acknowledgement. It feels like a crumb off of the white table. That's what it feels like. Like, we'll drop you a crumb so that you won't riot anymore. Look, we gave you a holiday. Can you please stop spilling into the streets? And it's overshadowed by the fact that the president of the United States was going to give a speech in Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Yep.
in the month of a massacre of Black people, the first Black Wall Street, a thriving Black community that remains decimated. And of course, humans are thriving, but economically devastated to this day. Communities and families don't recover from that in a generation or two or three. And so the month of the 99th anniversary of the Tulsa race massacre, it was not a riot. It was white people with baseball bats and ropes. It was racial terror. And so for the president to do that and then like, oh, I'll just do it on the next day instead. No, that also in that context. And it makes me angry. In fact, it's not just complicated, it's complicated. It's part of the history of racial injustice that people don't want to deal with in this country, and economic injustice. But yeah, so it's angering. And yeah, I'm glad that my white friends in Charlottesville want to know where and when the Juneteenth celebration is. But I'm like, and what else?
Right.
What's next? What's
Yep.
next?
Yeah. The whole Tulsa thing with the rally that was supposed to happen today, which is happening tomorrow, that just shows. I mean, I don't want to make this podcast about Donald Trump because that could be a 5-hour conversation. But
I don't either.
It just shows how inept he and his team and white people that follow him, that like him, that are falling in line with who he is and what he says and what he does, how inept they are, and how shallow their desire to be an ally is. Because moving it one day didn't do shit. Like, oh, look at me. I mean, the dude literally said yesterday, I've done so much for Juneteenth. I made it famous. Nobody knew about it before that, which is complete and utter bullshit. But like, and that, because then that shows me that he didn't really, moving it from 19th to 20th was just a PR thing. There's no real desire to help and to serve and to understand and to listen there. Not a thing. Cancel your rally, dude.
He knew. Well, my real belief is that they knew full well that it was Juneteenth. They knew exactly what they were doing. If they didn't know right away, they knew very quickly, and they chose not to move. They chose to wait. Like, this is drama. He's the king. We must give it to him. He's the king of television drama, right? Yeah. And so, he's not the king of Wall Street. He's a failed businessman, yes. but he's good at reality TV. And this presidency is just one long episode of reality TV. And that was reality TV for his base.
Yeah.
And it worked. It absolutely worked. And so now people are flocking to Tulsa for the wrong damn reason.
Yeah.
For the wrong reason.
Yeah, they've been lining up for 2 days. They've been lining up for 2 days.
Yep.
Okay, before we get too deep into this stuff, I want to help people. And I don't, this is our first time meeting, so I want to know more about you. So before we get deep into what's currently happening right now, I want to talk about what happened in 2015 with you at Wheaton. We're going to talk about your doc that I want everyone to see. Before all of that, who are you? Where are you from? What are some of the people, places, and things that made you into who you are today?
Yeah. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I am a Leo. I'm on the Leo Virgo border. My birthday's August 22nd. If that tells your people anything, I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. If that tells y'all anything. And what that really means is that deep within me is, I have a deep sense of right and wrong. I'm also an oldest child, right? And if you study anything about birth order, or just have observed anything about birth order, oldest children are normally the ones who do everything right and want to please their parents and that kind of thing. And I just fall in line. And I asked my mom, she's like, you just came out like that. Yes, that's how you came out, right? And for good or ill, I can't unsee injustice. And once you have been presented with that, so for me, my inheritance is a rich inheritance of Black ancestors whose dignity remained intact, and that I see in these old pictures that I look at of them, their outward beauty, but also their inner beauty, and the stories I hear from my parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles about these people who have bequeathed this rich legacy of Blackness to me. And yes, of Black struggle and suffering. But what they have bequeathed to me is making meaning out of suffering. My grandfather was a pastor. Before that, he was an engineer. And before that, during that, he served in World War II, worked for the Federal Aviation Administration. He came home to Oklahoma City after serving in World War II to be spat on the street. My uncle two uncles served one in Vietnam and one during the Vietnam era in Germany. I have my great grandfather before my grandfather served in World War I. I have a long history of Black folk who have done this as an act of civic duty, not as devotion to a flag, but as their civic duty, who come home and turn around to be denounced as sub-citizen, like failed citizen, subpar, not for anything that they have done, but because they're Black. My mom comes from a family of 8 kids. Her older sister was the first Black undergraduate class to live in the dorms at the University of Oklahoma. Her first roommate moved out because she was white. And so her next roommate was a woman of Southeast Asian Indian descent. And they remain best friends to this day, Pestinji. And then my mother and father met at the University of Oklahoma, he from New Jersey, the summer of the Newark riots. And so laced through my family's story is inescapable entanglements with white supremacist United States. And so as a little girl, I cannot help but internalize the injustice that my people have endured. And they don't have to say it. I'm smart enough to hear it and smart enough to know that in my elementary school, I would be looked at differently than the white kids. My parents, I don't remember my parents ever saying to me, Larycia, you have to be twice as good. That never came across their lips. I knew. And so that's who I be. That's who I be. That's my legacy. And so I have within me a deep sadness about injustice, not just against my Black brothers and sisters, but exacted against anyone. So that's who I am. I mean, in toto, that's my story. And Oklahoma is not the South, but it was a place where Jim Crow was on the books to the hilt. There were lynchings in Oklahoma. My grandmother remembers. So anyway, that's who I am. And I have 2 sisters. I'm like I said already, I'm the oldest. I have a nephew. My parents and one of my grandmothers is still alive. And so, I think it really makes me part of who I am. And then who I am in particular is the one who can't keep her mouth shut about injustice is maybe, they're like, be quiet, like you don't have to like make a thing of this thing, right? But yeah, but my family knows me and they love me. So
If you manage to get "She couldn't shut up about injustice" on your gravestone, I think that'll be a very fine thing to be remembered by. Here's something interesting. I mean, thank you for sharing all of that. This is not going to be an anti-white conversation, but there are realities that we have to talk through. And something very subtle that I've noticed. I've interviewed all kinds of people on this show: Black, white, of Asian descent, of all over the place. I try to bring a mix of men and women and different religious backgrounds, no religious backgrounds. Here's one thing I've noticed: when I ask white people to share their story with me, like I've asked you, so many times, not all the time, but so many times, it is over in like 5 seconds. They will say, "Hey, I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I have, parents and they loved me and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And I went to school here and here I am." And something I've noticed is that when I ask Black people, Black guests such as yourself, and, I had Lisa Sharon Harper on a few weeks ago. And when I asked her, "Tell me your story," she just kind of threw her head back and she said, "Well, it starts 450 years ago." And she went through and just talked and talked and talked. And I think it's so important, not to say that white people don't have a history like that, but it seems like what I've noticed by and large is that white people aren't as interested in their heritage, where they've come, the wrongs they've done, the rights they've done, what their grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents' contribution was to society, or if they didn't have one and they're now in a position where they want to make a legacy because their ancestors didn't. Like it just, I've noticed that distinct difference where Black people have gone through so much since being brought over to this country against their will. And seems to be a greater desire to figure out there's so much more pride in who the ancestors were and what they've gone through. And so it's just interesting to hear your story. So thank you for sharing that. The things that you talked about uncles and grandpa and great grandpa, and that they fought for this country and came back to experience discrimination and hatred and different things like that. Like that is a real part of who we are, who we were back then and who we are still today, right? Those are the things we have to struggle through. Is like in the same way that slavery was not fully and truly abolished in 1862 or 1865. I was listening to a podcast from a dear brother that I love, but disagree with on so many levels. A friend he leads a church planting network, and he's white, and he's pretty convinced that the narrative that systemic oppression is still a thing is wrong, and that Black people do truly have an equal seat at the table today, because he looks at data without looking at context. So he's looking at the data, and the facts are that redlining was abolished. The facts are slavery's been abolished for 200 years. The facts are this and the facts are that, and not looking at the context and also the full story. You can say, well, this was abolished here and this is not. These, like, we do have equal rights under the law, but if you don't go to Black people, all kinds of Black people, and say, "What's your story? When was the first time a police officer pulled a gun on you? When was the first time you noticed people looking at you when you walked into a grocery store to make sure you weren't shoplifting? When was the first time this? And when was the first time that?" That you don't have the full story. You can't just look at numbers, right? And so I think all of those stories, all that to say, the story you've shared is beautiful, and it's hard to listen to, but it's part of, another day in the life of a Black American, right? Like it is just that, to kind of get the full context. So thank you for sharing that. And you currently
thanks for noticing that.
Yeah,
thanks for noticing the difference between the cultural difference of how we engage. There's nothing wrong with the narration of one story as, "I was born here, this is what I do." But that's, I could have done that, but it's not who I am.
Yeah. So. Right. So you're in higher education. You're a PhD, right? What got you interested in wanting to go, all the way in terms of like your academic studies? It's a hard road that you've chosen. Not many people choose it. So what was it about? Maybe it was, you've already talked about your not being able to unsee injustice and not being able to not do something about it. And so maybe it was part of your upbringing, but what got you interested in higher education?
That's a really interesting question. One of the things that I was always interested in growing up, Maria Hinojosa, retweeted me yesterday. She's Latino USA.
Yep.
I grew up on Sesame Street and NPR. That's my earliest remembrances of like loving the news and, loving Big Bird and Maria on Sesame Street. And anyway, I'm saying that to say I've always loved the news. I've always liked current events. And some of that is, I imagine my insides were turning every time I heard about unjust things. And if you can't unsee it, then you also can't understand why anyone would do that. Like, why would anyone chain other humans up? So it just for the soul that can't unsee that darkness. Yes, there's a racial cast to some of these things, but it's also, it all just runs together. You can't see the color of people on the radio. So there's something that I've always been connected to in terms of people, testimony, narrative, and some of that comes from my growing up in a Black church tradition, which is an oral tradition. And in most variants of Christianity, testimony is part of that. At least Protestant Christianity, testimony is a huge part of what it means to be part of a Christian community. And if people's testimony of history and injustice matters, I think I wanted to be part of a telling, a re-narration, a retelling, a reframing from the perspective of the oppressed one, but then also, and I wouldn't have been able to articulate this then, right? But
Sure.
In hindsight, a retelling, a reframing, and re-articulation of narratives from the perspective of the oppressed, and then also part of righting those wrongs. And so as an undergrad, I studied history and sociology. And then I worked a little bit after graduating, and my dad was like, go to grad school. I literally did a very expensive year at a private liberal arts college of an MBA. Woo, that was an expensive year, to figure out that really I didn't want to do business management. I just thought that's what I was supposed to do, even though I had this hunger inside of me to do justice, right? And I took a public management class during my MBA, and it was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to work for justice I want to manage in the public realm. So I started looking for government jobs. I got a government job, started working in urban development, community development block grants for a year. And then I loved the coursework so much. I was like, well, I'm going to get a PhD someday, but I didn't want to do it yet. I wanted to work in government on injustice, right? And so I wanted to be a bureaucrat. And then one of my profs said, well, Larycia, we really think you need to do a PhD. And I was like, oh, I'll do that later. They're like, we'll pay for your school. And I was like, oh. And this is in Oklahoma.
The conversation.
Yeah. And my nephew had been born at that point. And I was like, they'll pay for my PhD. I get to go to my nephew's soccer games on Saturdays, live 30 minutes from him, and watch him grow up. Because, PhDs, it's a long haul.
Yeah.
It's not for and done. So I said, yeah. Even at that point, I didn't know I was going to be a professor. I just knew I was going to get a PhD. Because really, still, I wanted to go back and work in public policy and affect change that way. Think about equity from the perspective of communities and developing communities. Still thinking in that business mindset, but it's just that was not to be. And so I guess I caught the teaching bug because that's how I was paying the bills, right? Teaching American politics and government kind of eased my way into being a professor. And that's how I ended up at Wheaton College in Illinois and eventually at UVA, where I am now, which isn't very sexy. It was not this epiphany, like, but that's how it happened.
No, that's good. That's good. That's really good context. I mean, if somebody's going to pay for your school and they see kind of value in you getting that degree, like, hell yeah, like go for it, you know? So that's really cool. I want to talk in a bit about kind of current events, as well as you living in, I mean, Charlottesville, Virginia is kind of an interesting place in light of the conversations we're having, 2017 Unite the Right rally and all that. Before we get to all that, though, I think this is a good place to kind of dive into your time at Wheaton and kind of the event that put you on blast in the media, on the big screen, as it were. You were at Wheaton for how long?
I was at Wheaton for 8 years, 8.5 years, 8 years and one semester.
Got it. And so you became, the first female Black tenured professor at Wheaton College, which is a big thing. Was that a fast track for tenure? I feel like it feels like it to me. I'm not a big like higher education buff, but you kind of getting tenure there, that feels like a big deal, right?
Yeah. So Wheaton College was founded in 1860, I believe. It was a stop on the Underground Railroad. It was the first institution. It's a verified stop, so it's on the National Register, everything. It was the first institution in the state of Illinois to admit a Black man, namely, he was not enslaved, but, this is at the height of the Civil War. And during one of the semesters at Wheaton during the Civil War, the majority of the class was off fighting on behalf of the Union. I think there were one or two students who fought on behalf of the Confederacy. So it's a school steeped in abolitionist fervor, steeped in social justice fervor in terms of its founding. For those of your listeners who don't know, it has an evangelical cast, but the founder was Methodist, interestingly. But at some point, it took a kind of evangelical shift over the years as Christianity, Protestant Christianity in the U.S. turned. So I worked there. It was my first academic job and got tenure in 2013. And I had started a peace and conflict studies program there. That took several years to get off the ground because of bureaucracy and some roadblocks internally to doing that. And in the fall of 2015 that you're talking about, I was teaching the very first Intro to Peace and Conflict Studies intro class. We had, I think, 16 students, which was amazeballs for the very first iteration of the class. It was delightful, and it was, I feel like, a wonderful moment in the history of a social justice founded institution to finally have a program reflective of that founding.
155 years later after its founding.
Yeah.
Give me the elevator pitch for this class, because I'm obviously I'm very intrigued by the idea of peace and conflict. Like,
right.
Why did you want to teach it? And kind of, again, like, what was the synopsis?
Well, this is a great question. I mean, there are a lot of kind of internal dimensions of curricula and programs. One of the most popular programs at Wheaton College that I actually was involved in was called the Human Needs and Global Resources Program, but it's highly selective. Students apply, I think, early their sophomore year. So you have to know pretty early on that you want to do this. You have to become, fluent, or at least very have a high facility with a language, maybe be willing to learn a language that the school doesn't offer, like Hindi. You want to go to certain parts of India. So students have to apply pretty early, and everyone doesn't know. And students are placed in a developing or underdeveloped country in a home for 6 months. They get a visit from a faculty. It's an amazing, life-changing program. Students aren't going to teach people, they're going to learn. Learning from some of the most oppressed. I like to say what I learned going to visit students was I learned what it means to be human. So for example, I visited Rwanda. I visited an organization that is continuing to reconcile Hutu and Tutsis in the aftermath of genocide, because there's still a lack of reconciliation, all of these fallouts and ramifications of the genocide, obviously, over 20 years later. It changed my life. That's not an understatement. Everyone who knows me knows that seeing a person sit next to the person who killed their entire family, breaking bread with them, living side by side with them, raising their kids together, raising their cows together, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And what that says to me is, we think we have stuff to forgive here. We think we have rivenness. Try living in the aftermath of genocide where your neighbor killed your neighbor,
Wow.
where a husband kills his wife. And they are forgiving one another. And this is a hard-fought forgiveness, yes. It's not simplistic. But if they can do that, so can we. And so I say that to say, what we lacked, though, was a program for students in general who were interested in things like kind of local community development, local community peacemaking. We have myriad opportunities in Chicago. Like Wheaton is literally a 25-minute train ride from Chicago. The train comes every hour. And then other students wanted to do more of these kinds of programs unconnected from the Human Needs and Global Resources program that I was a part of. And so there was demand all over campus from all kinds of students for some kind of academic home instead of hobbling together classes here and there, where they could get something like a certificate, which is more hours than a minor, less than a major, kind of somewhere in between, do internships, but receive kind of guided study and curriculum around, well, what is peace? What is conflict? Is conflict bad? Well, actually, conflict is normative. Conflict is part of life, right? There was pushback against calling it peace studies because the administration thought, well, we have an ROTC. Are they going to feel left out? And actually, the ROTC was one of the first departments to say, we're training to keep peace. We believe in peace, right? Yes, we're trained to defend and to fight if we have to, but we want peace. So what the miracle was, there was such buy-in. And so the class was comprised of, well, let's talk about what is peace. It's not just the absence of conflict. Peace is an active pursuit, which as a Christian, for me, when I read the Beatitudes and when I read about the Prince of Peace, the Prince of Peace is actively, in some ways you could say, creating these situations and moments where rivenness comes to the circle so we can deal with it, right? Or it comes to the forefront so that we can deal with it. And so in some senses, come to bring peace, but a sword, right? To get it all on the table. And that's what the program was meant to do, to give students a place. And there have been graduates of the program, which is exciting, and it continues. So that's why I started it. There was a lot of student demand. And so it wasn't just like necessarily like I was sitting around going, because it's hard to do. I mean, I spent my only sabbatical, I was at Wheaton. I spent that whole semester essentially working on this program, not on my own work. Because it just took so much to get the sign off and the buy-in and all of that. And I'm pleased to do that. And I want to give a shout out to Notre Dame, the Kroc Institute there. Kroc money is McDonald's money, but they've given a lot of money to peace building. And I got to go to a free institute at Notre Dame one summer, me and two of my colleagues, to learn about how to start peace and conflict programs. because, so it's neat to know that this is a pursuit all over the country at all kinds of schools, not just Christian schools, though. So.
Man, there's so much in there I kind of want to dive into, but I'll try to hold back for now. But I do think I will say this. That seems like a course that I want to take and that I want everyone to take, because so many of us, I think, for those of us that call ourselves Christians, or really any of the kind of major religions, that are out there, they're all calling ultimately for people to, be peacemakers, right? In the Christian faith, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the meek. They'll see God, they'll inherit the earth. Like it's kind of this ultimate goal to become a peacemaker, but to get to achieve that goal of peace and shalom, we have to go through some shit. And that's it's hard conversations and it's hard stuff. And we might have to put up a fight here and there. Like right now, we're peacefully protesting not at this moment, but there's a group of us, I was talking about it before we were recording, in downtown Nashville. At the beginning of the George Floyd protests, we tore down the Edward Carmack statue, blatant racist, and we're trying to get a statue of Ida B. Wells put up there, the antithesis of Carmack. And right now, in the past 7 days, there have been people there for 7 straight days in shifts, 24 hours a day, and we've had 30 people arrested, and we've all done everything peacefully. There's been no antagonizing. Yes, there's been anger and there's been shouting and there's been some rowdiness because we have 50 state troopers and National Guard staring at us from across the street at any given time, and they've arrested us for absolutely nothing. I was almost arrested the other night, as a result of trying to get onto our property that belongs to us. And they had no reason to keep us off, but they assaulted several of us in order to kind of, COVID-19 and this and that and these kind of bullshit made up rules in the moment to kind of keep us off our property. Anyway, that all to point out that to get to peacemaking, hard stuff has to happen in the process a lot of times. It isn't just, let's forget about everything that's happened, let's shake on it and we'll just go, we'll act like nothing bad has ever happened here in this circumstance. And that's not it. Yeah. That's not it. Jesus himself flipped tables. He upset the powers that be. He had no problem calling out the state and was ultimately killed by the state for pursuing, peace and justice on the earth, right? And so that's an interesting. I would love to look at. Maybe you can pass along some of that stuff later on. I'd love to see the course more in depth. But okay, so cool. So later you were just beginning. So let's bring it up to speed. You're in the fall semester of 2015. You just began to teach this course that you worked really hard on. And in December of 2015, in a season that Christians call Advent, you did something that caused a ruckus. And you admittedly did not think it was going to be a ruckus because in your mind, this was a simple act of solidarity, something that Christians and non-Christians alike should constantly be seeking to do with people that don't live or believe in the same way that we do. So give us some context for what happened on that. I think it was a Facebook post, on that Facebook post that kind of blew up and that ultimately cost you your job. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So it was December 2015. And given that every day these days feels like a month, yes. I want to remind everyone, like, what was going on in December 2015 was the height of campaigning for the upcoming presidential elections, right? What had happened also was the San Bernardino shootings, if you recall, in California. I sadly don't remember how many people lost their lives there, but there was a Muslim extremist and an associate that were arrested, I think killed by the police when they were apprehended. And there was an uptick in anti-Muslim vitriol. And in the midst of that, Donald Trump is running for president of the United States on a slogan of "Make America Great Again." the red hats weren't out yet at that point. And Donald Trump made a speech on December 7th, 2015, in which he said he was critiquing President Obama's response. And he said, if I become president of the United States, I will ban Muslims from entering the United States of America. And Jerry Falwell Jr. of Liberty University, a Christian university, a very large Christian university with tens of thousands of students online and on campus. So it has a lot of influence in this area of Virginia where I live and in the United States broadly, amongst a certain constituency. But he was speaking in what's called their convocation, in other words, chapel, a religious service, essentially. And in their religious services, for example, people kind of come and from preachers to politicians, right? And kind of prove their fundamentalist / evangelical bona fides. From chapel, I can't remember, a politician had just spoken and he got up and he addressed what happened in San Bernardino. And this is what he said to like 30,000 people sitting in their basketball gymnasium. What he said is, if those Muslims showed up in here, if everyone had what I have in my back pocket, and he takes his hand and makes a trigger finger, we could end those Muslims before they end us. And then he said, I don't know, is it illegal for me to pull this out? Meaning his gun, right? And he said, and by the way, we offer gun training classes on campus, like gun certification classes on campus. Virginia has open carry laws. I was just at a protest last night, surrounded by groups of militia with AK-47s, packing them openly on their bodies. And counter protesters to our peaceful Black Lives Matter protest. High school students had organized it. And white men with big guns are saying they're there to protect us, right? That's the country we live in. And so imagine that was happening also in December of 2015. But the target then was anyone who was Muslim, who looked Muslim, and certainly women who wear hijabs on their head because they're the most easily visible targets, right?
Yep.
I mean, we know the difference between a hijabi and a nun, right? The habit, it's similar. It's a similar like religious concept even.
Yep.
It's covering out of devotion to God. And that's why Muslim women wear a hijab. A hijab is a way to honor Allah with their body. And so in the midst of that, I had a college student come to me and she's like, and it was just like this kind of flyby, throwaway kind of conversation. Like, hey, I'm thinking maybe my friends and I are going to wear a hijab in solidarity with our Muslim friends. And so I was like, okay, well, let me talk to my friends at the Council on American and Islamic Relations and find out if that would be considered something that's okay to do.
Sure, yeah.
Would that be considered offensive to them? Is that considered like what's called haram, unclean, defiling of the hijab? Would this honor them? And so I called the Council on American Islamic Relations because I had a friend on the board and the one in Chicago. And I said, hey, my student is talking about this and she wants to make this kind of a national thing for college students, for women flying home from campus in solidarity with their Muslim sisters. That's how it started. And as college students are at the end of the semester, because it's December, I say, hey, we've got the green light and I'm going to do this with you guys. Because again, I'm teaching this peace and conflict studies class as a way of showing solidarity with what you're doing, but also as a way of kind of pedagogically, it's a teaching tool, but not just a teaching demonstration tool. It's a way of living what I'm saying I believe in. So the original impetus came from a student. And then I didn't hear back from her. And I was like, well, okay, I'm going to show up on Thursday with this hijab on. And that on Friday with the hijab on. So that evening, December 10th, 2015, I made a Facebook post. It said, I don't love my Muslim neighbor because they're American. I don't love my Muslim neighbor because, whatever. I said, I love my Muslim neighbor because they're formed of the same primordial clay, because we're humans. Mm-hmm. And I said, I also love my Muslim neighbor because I'm a Christian, and like me, we are people of the book, descendants of Abraham, same religious family tree, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, right? Mm-hmm. And then I talked about the fact that as part of my Advent devotion, which you mentioned, Advent is the time where Christians believe Jesus comes in the form of a baby, obviously through Mary and Joseph, and we all know the songs "Away in a Manger" and that kind of thing. But for Christians, we believe it's not just this little tiny baby, weak and fragile, but it's literally the embodiment of God, and the literal power of the God of the universe in the form of a baby. That's a powerful symbol. It's a symbol. It's what we call the incarnation, right? The literal instantiation of God in the form of a human, a fragile human, who comes in solidarity with the most weak and the most oppressed. So this image of a weak baby making, that God makes God's self weak in order to identify with the weak and oppressed is this beautiful image, whether one believes it or not. That's the call of humanness, is to be in solidarity with our neighbors because we all suffer. We're all born, we all die, and we suffer in between, and there's joy in between, but we're united in our fragility. Mm. And that, to me, is what I called embodied solidarity. It's one thing to say, I love my Muslim neighbor. It's another thing to put something on my head that allows me to embody their suffering, their beauty of their religious expression. Also, Jesus' mother, Mary, wore a hijab. Palestinian woman, that's what she wore. Look at any icon. That's not a halo on her head. It's a hijab. Mm. And so it was something that I considered an honor. I don't want to say a religious duty, but for me in that moment, a way to embody religious devotion at a very busy time for me professionally. I'm always focusing on school, getting grades done, getting finals giving finals. And I just thought this is a way for me to focus on my own religious devotion while being in embodiment with my sisters who practice a different religion that is nevertheless connected to mine. And so that's what I did. And then all holy hell broke loose within Christianity. And this went across the world. I was getting calls that next day because the Facebook post went viral from across the world. And I'm sitting in a thesis defense for 3 hours and teaching my last classes. And I'm like, oh, whatever. I just didn't realize how big it had blown up. And then I see on LinkedIn, MSNBC is trying to get in touch with me. And I'm like, this isn't about attention. I just was very naive to what had just happened, right? So this was really intended to be something. And I said, I'm going to wear the hijab at work. I'm going to wear it at home. I'm going to wear it to church on Sunday. It was just me making a commitment. This isn't just something I'm going to put on while I'm at work as a show. This is something I want to do as a real kind of act of embodied solidarity, like I said.
So you're at school the next day with a hijab on.
Yeah.
When you're kind of fully realizing what's happening. When was the first time that you that someone from the school talked to you, or you knew that you were, and I'm putting air quotes, in trouble for what had happened?
Well, that Friday, I didn't hear from anyone at the school. I mean, like I said, I was in a thesis defense with other people. They looked at me strange. I don't know. No one said anything. It was that next Monday. No, actually that next Tuesday, because Monday is we call it a dead day where students don't have classes. I had a class over to my house for brunch so that they could do their final presentations. And so that day I have a picture of me with my students I'm wearing the hijab at home. And then we're done. And then that next morning, I was in my peace and conflict studies class, and they were doing their final presentations. And that's when I got a text message from my department chair asking if I was going to a meeting that I had no idea about. I had left my house at 6 a.m. to pick up donuts for my kiddos. 6:30 maybe. I checked my email at 6 a.m. I remember that, because it's rare for me to check email before leaving for work.
Yeah, sure.
So because I lived 45 minutes from Wheaton with traffic. And I remember very specifically, I checked my email at 6 a.m. There was nothing. But I guess in between getting donuts and getting to my final exam at 8 a.m., there was an email. So
Describe the days after that, because again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, it ultimately led to you not working at Wheaton anymore.
yeah.
So what kind of ensued after that? So all this kind of hit you in the face. I mean, people can, like, if they go Google your name, they're going to see pages and pages on Google of, different articles and news things. If they go on YouTube and type in your name, like, there's a lot out there, a lot happened in those coming days. How did you feel? How did you get through it? And did you ever think, oh shit, like maybe that wasn't the best thing to do? Or were you as convinced all the way through that, like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen through this, but I did the right thing. I'm happy to have stood in solidarity with my brothers and sisters, here and around the world.
So, you're talking about the Google thing. Like, the first article that usually comes up is one that's entitled, the professor who wore, it's a New York Times Magazine piece, and it's entitled "The Professor Who Wore a Hijab in Solidarity and Then Lost Her Job." So it's a funny title because it kind of like gives it all away. Yeah. But it's a great piece by a wonderful writer, a religion reporter she's not a reporter, she's a religion writer for Slate, and her name is
Ruth Graham.
Ruth Graham. Yeah.
I love Ruth. And she's awesome.
She is. And so I wanted to give her a shout out because, I mean, there are just so many great articles, I should say. Like, and I say that because, it was such a crazy thing. You asked what happened. Is a lot of what I did was spend time talking to reporters. Ruth Graham was one of them. Elizabeth Diaz, who's now at the New York Times, is one of them. At the time, she was at Time Magazine. From all over the world, and a lot from the US, and the importance of journalists and media to the unfolding of what happened next, and radio, and, some podcasts, but mostly, radio shows, and was in order to say the narratives was being framed by one side, which is this powerful university. I mean, your listeners may not know, Wheaton College is called the Harvard of Christian schools.
Yep.
My colleagues graduate from institutions like Harvard and Yale, and some of them went to Wheaton as undergrads and want to come back. I had students who left Wheaton 3 years later with their degree from Harvard Law School and are going and writing the Macedonian Constitution while they're still at Harvard. These are my students. These are my colleagues. I'm saying this because good liberals like to act like evangelicals are stupid. They're not. They know what the heck they're doing. Trump knows what the heck he's doing with regard to his base, and he's not a good evangelical, but he's figured out a little bit about how they operate.
Yes,
and
he has.
The reality is, it was shocking because we're a liberal arts institution. We're not a Bible school. We're not saying like, I vote by the book, like those bumper stickers you might see in Tennessee. I'm like, what does that mean? You vote by the Bible. Again, like, where's abortion in the Bible?
Exactly.
What did Jesus have to say about homosexuality? Like, so homosexuality, because that's the only thing, right? But anyway, so that being said, it was just a shit show. It was me trying to say, this is who I am. The mother of God wore a hijab. Mary, the mother of God, what Christians think is the mother of God, wore a hijab. And I wore a hijab in solidarity with my Muslim sisters. End of story.
Yeah.
It's what I thought Jesus would do.
Yeah, nothing more.
And embodied solidarity means I'm teaching my students as a professor at a university that takes academic knowledge seriously, which was the point of me talking about the academic side of Wheaton. We take scholarship very seriously. We take the liberal arts very seriously. In my upper level seminars, I tell my students at somewhat halfway through the semester, like, I'm teaching this like a graduate seminar, right? Because we can do this. We take scholarship seriously. We don't burn books at Wheaton. At least not when I was there, we didn't. We don't ban books at Wheaton, at least not when I was there. And it's an astute liberal arts school where I'm training people to think for life. But also, they happen to be Christian. It happens to be a school that is Christian, intentionally Christian. And I'm also trying to get them to think like the prophets about what does it mean to do justice. You can't say you're righteous if you're not doing justice. You also, what you call just acts are futile.
Yep.
If inside you're corrupt, right? You can give on the outside, and if you're screwing the poor, if you can give all the money you want, Mark Zuckerberg, or choose your favorite person, but like you're not treating your laborers well, then that too.
Yep.
Examine yourself. So righteousness and justice, and that's what I was teaching. And so it's also, teaching is a form of accountability to me.
Yep.
I teach about, I can't teach and not also do what I'm teaching. So I'm trying to get tenure and I'm serving on boards, and because that's what I can do, but I'm not out on the street protesting with my friends. And I'm on a labor board, and there are these low wage workers who are having wages stolen from them by business owners. And I'm like, most of the time sitting in a suburb in a college classroom. So the conflict for me is like, how do I embody that justice that I talk about? And that's how embodied solidarity was born in my peace and conflict studies class. I started talking about embodied solidarity. Solidarity, we can't just theorize about it. We can't just talk about it. The role of government and politics is to do justice in the public realm. Cornel West says, love is what justice looks like in public. And hell, what am I going to do? And so I was teaching my students, like, you need to do things that scare you. You need to do things that feel vulnerable for you. I can't tell you what is vulnerable for you, but I can tell you that for most white, wealthy evangelicals, going to a protest feels risky and scary.
Oh, yeah.
Standing in embodied solidarity feels risky and scary. And it's not just to be afraid or, but like, how do we enact, all of us, whether we're, kind of a religious, a codified religious kind of belief, we're ethical people. How do we enact those ethics? That's the question. And that's who I want to be as a professor. This is the same way I teach at UVA, the same way I teach here. It's not changed. I care more about who my students are and who they're becoming than what they retain from what we talk about. Now, I do hope they retain a lot.
Yes.
I teach my heart out, but I also care about who they're becoming in the world. And if they learn something from me about what it means to be and to embody justice, then I have done my job. That's what I'm called to do in the universe. And that's what I was trying to do at Wheaton. Sorry, I kind of got off.
No.
Back to UVA, but that's what I was trying to do and be. And you asked if I regret it. I have no regrets. None. Zero. I would do it again a million times. Knowing what I know now, I would do it again and again and again. It was not, in some ways, it was a kind of, it wasn't an unreflective decision. After I talked to my friends at the Council on American Islamic Relations that day, they said, Larycia, we see the intent of you and your students, and we want you to do it. And in fact, we want to call our friends at the local CBS Chicago station to do a story on it. Um, that ended up not happening for some reason, but we were also planning to do kind of an educational thing in the spring semester after the students wore the hijab home and came back. And they said, let's bring some of our French Muslim sisters who wear the hijab. Let's have your students. Let's have you on a panel and make this an educational thing for the community, the Wheaton community. And that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to, yes, educate, but also live out justice. And a large portion of the Chicago Muslim community was already on board, which is, the Council on American Islamic Relations isn't the only one, but it's one of the largest ones. So, yeah, I hope that gives people a sense of what was happening and the times. Like the context always matters.
It totally matters. I mean, if people can think back to 2015, the rhetoric and the hatred. I mean, this was the time when, I can't think of the date, but this is around the time when those white guys in Kansas walked into a bar and murdered a Sikh man because they confused him for, they just assumed he's got this turban on, he's a Muslim, and they killed him, sitting at the bar.
Yep.
Like, this is the time when Donald Trump was knowingly riling his base. He was stoking fires in a very real way. I mean, he was literally poking and prodding the bear to no end. And so context.
And people didn't believe that he was a viable candidate, y'all.
Yes, this was when we thought, this is when we, and I say we, along with millions of Americans and politicians alike, we thought this guy is a joke. There's no way America is dumb enough to elect him. I'm not sure if dumb is the word, but foolish is definitely the word. Because some smart people did elect him, but I think it's foolish. Smart people I know voted for him, but you can be smart and a fool, in every way, and that's the case, I think, in that decision. But yeah, context totally matters, and so I want to encourage people to go rent or buy, Same God. I want to encourage, which is a documentary that was made about this whole ordeal. It's fantastic. My friends, made it, and also just Google your name. Like, there's a lot more context out there. If they want to kind of listen to the interviews, read Ruth Graham's piece, fantastic. Ruth is great. But I just want to precisely the reason I wanted to have you on. I mean, I'm enjoying this talk either way. If we never got to this part, but getting to this part has reminded me of, you're saying in retrospect, I would do this 1,000 times over. But in the moment, you didn't have that retrospect. You didn't have that hindsight is 2020. You didn't have any of that. You just had a job and you had tenure at a young age. First, Black female tenured professor at this school in 155 years. Like, you had all of these things going for you. And you ultimately said, fuck it. This is the right thing to do. I'm going to do this. And ultimately it led to the loss of your job and you having to kind of not start over, but start over in so many regards, leading up to where you are now. You didn't have any of that. That's the thing about damn givers that I always try to emphasize is like, A, there's no rule book for this. There's no rule book for that. Nobody said, hey, this is the right way to do it. This is the wrong way to do it. You could have jumped the gun and not called your friends at the Islamic Center and talked to them about it. You could have done things totally different. There's no rule book for this. There's no rule book for giving a damn. You see a problem and you decide, am I going to do something about this or not? That is the decision. That is where it happens. That's where giving a damn happens is, nah, I'm not going to bother with that. That's not my thing. It's not the right time. I've got tenure. I've got this great job. I've got all these things going for me. I just can't risk it right now. That is the moment that everything hinges on in my view. And so I just want to kind of, before we move on, I want to recognize and honor that decision that you made, because for some people, giving a damn is super tiny. It's, holding a door, showing up to a protest in whatever city they're in. Those are like super simple, easy things. It costs you a lot to give a damn. And I don't want to kind of sweep that under the rug. That's a huge thing. Now, it seems to have, at least on the outside, it seems to be working out for you. Like, you have gained the respect of so many people, including myself. You have, a job again, you have all of these other things going for you, but you didn't know that at the time. And that's what I want to keep harping on is like, you didn't know that. It could have gone horribly wrong for you. And you could have been ostracized from the academic community. And I'm sure you have experienced some levels of ostracization, but you know, you're still working in the field, and that's wonderful. So I just wanted to take a moment to honor you, to honor what you've done, to honor the kinds of conversations that have happened as a result of that bold move that you took. So feel honored right now for a moment. So anyway, yeah, I want to encourage people, go watch the doc, go find out more about.
Watch the film.
Watch the film, because
it's not my film. It's film is all art. And I don't know how I would tell. I don't know how people tell their own story. I'm trying to write a book and it's hard enough. But like, the film is by Linda Midget. She's a director, and Eric, Aspiration Entertainment, there in Nashville, has also contributed greatly to the distribution. And it's a perspective on what was happening. And she started filming in the middle of all of it. So, it was just, we didn't know how it was. She likes to say, the director, we didn't know how it was going to end. Like, we didn't know if I was going to still be at Wheaton when the film ended, or where I would end up. So it follows me from like the middle of the shit show to where I am at the University of Virginia right now. And it's a lot of hard work for her. And so, as an honoring of Linda Midget and her effort, please go on Amazon, iTunes. I think it's 99 cents through the end of June.
Yeah. Yep. I'm going to promote that in the show notes, because it's $1 right now through June 30th. So you should definitely.
So you can always watch it, and like, please let Linda know and share with your friends, or buy it for your friends.
Buy it for your friends. So here's what I want to spend the next bit of our time on. 3 months ago, Ahmaud Arbery was hunted down and murdered in broad daylight while on a run. 3 months ago, well, a little less than 3 months ago, Breonna Taylor was murdered in her home, in her bed, as a result of a, I think, unconstitutional no-knock warrant they're so ridiculous, and her killers are still out and about collecting a paycheck, but paid for by taxpayer dollars.
Mm-hmm.
A few weeks ago, George Floyd was murdered in my old neighborhood in Minneapolis, Minnesota. 8 minutes, 46 seconds on his neck. I can't breathe. And the whole country is in upheaval because of that, still to this day. And I'm glad for it. I'm glad for the upheaval. I'm glad for I'm glad for institutions being called into question, and all sorts of things. And then still, there's still developments happening in this case. But then a few days ago, Rayshard Brooks, Wendy's parking lot, shot in the back as he's running away. And we can name, these are just the ones that have happened recently. And I must also note they're the ones that we know about, not the ones that were not caught on camera over the last few months. But we could go back over the past few years since cell phone video cameras became a thing. And, we have seen over and over and over and over and over again, these things continue to happen. So in light of all of that, and in light of everything that's happening, and you said last night you were at a protest, my question is simply this: how are you?
Oh, you're going to make me cry. Sorry, my mom called. I'm trying to turn my phone off because it almost kicked me off of our Zoom call.
That's fine. Mom, call back later.
Mommy.
You could call her if you could talk to her right now.
Turn my phone off. No, it's so funny. Well, it's just like I had my phone off to the side and I meant to turn it off. It's silenced, but then it was about to kick me off of Zoom. That's, this is our lives
Yes, it is.
These days. But thank you. Oh, thank you. Because I'm not good. What happened at Wheaton is still very traumatizing. And everything in the United States is about race. And it's a hard time to be a Black person. It's a hard time to be a person of color. It's hard, like we started our conversation kind of talking about, I can tell my tone of voice has changed, but we started talking about, today is Juneteenth. My mom's father is from Texas, and I can't help but think that my ancestors were some of the ones who found out late. They didn't get to have the watch party on December 31st when they knew the Emancipation Proclamation was to take effect on January 1st. But Black churches repeat that. I never knew why growing up we had watch party service on Sunday, December 31st. It doesn't matter if it's a Sunday or what. Black churches have what's called watch meeting. And that's where that comes from. It comes from slaves waiting to be freed on January 1st. But the ones in Texas did not have that luxury. And I can't help but think, because we don't quite know our lineage all the way back on that side, that my people were amongst those in Texas who finally got the good news. So I'm not well. There's epigenetic research. So now I'm doing my professor thing turn, but there's epigenetic research that shows that, family descendants of Holocaust survivors, descendants of enslaved folk, we carry in our body, in our blood, in our DNA, in our bones, the traces of that trauma. So no, I am not okay. And it makes me angry when the United States thinks, and white people think they can flip a switch and the script is flipped. No, the script has not been flipped. It remains to be seen whether this is what's happening now is progress. I'm in a wait and see mode. Most Black people I know, we're just like, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. So I got excited last night because Amy Klobuchar did what I think is important for people to do, which is white people need to divest of their power. They need to step back and say, I will not take this promotion.
Yeah.
They need to say, not just, I will not take this promotion, I will step down. She said, I removed my name from the VP list. And then I saw someone else tweet, this morning, Amy Klobuchar is very strategic in Midwest. Anyone running for president is very strategic. And she said she just didn't, she wanted to take her name out so that if Elizabeth Warren got chosen, she didn't have egg on her face or whatever. And I'm like, I'm just not that strategic. Like, I would never think that. And then I thought, well, hell yeah. Like, she gets a lot of credibility and attention, and I have respect for the decision that she made, right? It's very hard, and I'm saying this to say it's very hard to trust white motives because it's virtue signaling all around.
Yep.
And it's hard to know what's real.
Yep.
And white people love for you to look at the intent of their heart, especially when they did something racist. Like, that's not what I meant. Well, it's about the effect. And it's just hard to trust. It's hard to trust. So I'm skeptical. I'm not rejoicing. I'm very skeptical all around that this is going to end peacefully. I was at a protest yesterday, surrounded by no less than 4 different militia groups. It was a peaceful protest of high school students. There were 4 armed militia groups and white men standing in huddles with their arms crossed in their camo gear and their shit kickers and their work boots. In Oklahoma, we call cowboy boots shit kickers. And there you go. Maybe you do in Tennessee too. I don't know. And that's what's happening right now. And I'm sad to say, I do not think that the 2020 elections are going to have a peaceful ending.
No way.
I think there's going to be violence, not because I want there to be, but because for the first time in my life yesterday, at a peaceful protest, I wasn't scared of Wheaton. I was afraid yesterday. Because everywhere I went, there was somebody armed and ready. Imagine a fireworks had gone off, a spark, the truck backfired. Like, what was, like, I just could not help but think. Like, if something like that had happened, it's not good. This is not a good time to be alive. And so when I'm on my Facebook page and white men are arguing with me about Mr. Brooks, he was driving drunk, he deserved to be shot in the back. That tells me everything I need to know.
Yeah.
About where many white people still are. We're still arguing about the fact that he was sitting asleep in his car, inebriated. I haven't seen the breathalyzer results, by the way, if we want to be technical.
Yep.
I have watched the whole video. He was running.
Here's the reality. According to his story, which they never, they never did verify, maybe they never intended to verify, was that his girlfriend dropped him off there. So he wasn't driving drunk. He was sitting in his car drunk. And according to his story, he pulled out and said, "Oh shit, I shouldn't be driving," and pulled right back in. Right? He was in a parking lot.
He was in a parking lot.
He offered.
The woman who called on him was not afraid of him. The manager. Did you listen to the 911 call?
I did.
She was not afraid of him.
Nope. She just said
She
he's
said
fallen
no.
asleep.
She said he doesn't have a weapon. He's asleep.
Nope.
I just want him out of my life. That's what she said.
Yep. And that's all they could have done is moved him out. He offered to walk home. That officer should have, and I listened to a, the podcast, The Daily. I listened to yesterday, I think yesterday or the day before was a conversation around, all things Rayshard Brooks. And they had some cops on there, some like former police chiefs and stuff that were police chiefs and lieutenants that were saying like, well, what if they let him go and he walked home and then came back, got the car, drove his car and killed someone drunk driving? And he said there's real liability there for the police officers. And I was like, none of that justifies shooting him in the back as he is running away. Well, why did he struggle with the cops? And I said, well, maybe it's because he just saw one of his brothers, George Floyd, handcuffed, being murdered by a cop, and he didn't want that to happen. Maybe.
He's in the same position that George Floyd was in.
And he's in the same position. Yeah, so it's like it's
called trauma. He's traumatized.
And like you just said, I don't know the word you talked about, but you said Black people carry this trauma in their bones, in their blood, in their DNA. It's in there. Mm-hmm. And that is something that when white people start talking and saying, well, this looting and this rioting and this protesting shouldn't be happening. Look, it's just George Floyd. It's just one mistake. And it's like, no, you are failing. You are failing. You are utterly failing to realize that this is not about George Floyd. It is about 450 years of shit. Mm-hmm. It is millions of Black people being murdered and abused and raped and beaten. It's all of that. It's not just George Floyd or Rayshard Brooks or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor or or Freddie Gray or Tamir Rice or any of it's not just these singular. All of them are injustices, but it's not this singular incident. It is all of that kind of wrapped up into one. And so. And to add insult to injury, I guess you now live in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is, most people probably, it's obviously the home of University of Virginia, But it's also the home of the Unite the Right famous rally 2017, Richard Spencer and others that organized it. I mean, we've got these iconic photos of these boys. I mean, they're literally some boys like yelling and screaming these neo-Nazi like chants while holding literally like they look like garden torches.
They're tiki torches.
Yeah, tiki
That's what
torches,
they were.
right?
That's what they were actually holding.
And we see these iconic photos that have made my blood boil in the past. And it's also the place where James Field Jr. drove his car into protesters, which led to Heather Heyer's death, right? So you now live. And were you there? When did you move? I guess you probably were living there at the time, or no?
So they were filming. The film crew for Same God was in Chicago at the time, and I was giving a talk that Friday, like that next Friday, right? So August 11th and 12th, I had a talk to give on the 14th. In Chicago, and then I was moving to Virginia. So 11th and 12th, I was not in Chicago. I was not in Charlottesville, excuse me. I was still in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say I was living for several years. I was living between the two CHs, Chicago and Charlottesville. And so I was still at my place in Chicago, and I turn on MSNBC and I see friends of mine who I knew were organizing they were the counter-protest. They were protesting the Unite the Right permitted march. It was a permitted march, and in which the Unite the Right was rallying around Confederate statues, which is also very relevant to the moment that we're in, relevant to your own perhaps constituency in Tennessee. You mentioned the toppling of one of the racist statues in your own city. And so I also want to add, it was not just young boys, it was grown ass men and women who were part and parcel of the chants, excuse me, Jews will not replace us. Yep. You will not replace us. They're marching close to, all of you don't know the landscape here, a synagogue. And guess what they're marching around? They're marching around the statue of Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. Because what the United States is symbolic of is white supremacy. Thomas Jefferson had a woman that he kept in his basement, repeatedly raped, and Americans like to call it a secret marriage, a secret love affair. That's how people like to think about Sally Hemings. It's not true. She didn't get to choose, right? Like, we call that in the professions a hierarchical relationship, where when one person is in a power, when you're in a powered relationship, and one person has all the power, you can't call that love. Mm-mm. And so that's where I live. And I work at the university that my ancestors built, University of Virginia. And that Thomas Jefferson, Monticello, famed Monticello, beautiful Monticello, sits up on the mountaintop and looks down on the land of the university that James Madison donated, because all those fathers of the Constitution, right here, Constitution Highway, all racist. I don't care whether they had slaves or not. Yeah. And Thomas Jefferson definitely, I mean, you can talk about the Declaration of Independence. Those are Locke's words, not his. And so I just need for us to understand how deep this goes into our lore. Yep. So it's I like to say America is one long lynching for Black people. Yeah. It's a long lynching, and I can't unsee that. Sorry. Not sorry. This is what I do for a living, but it's also who I am. And so that's where I am. That's where I live right now in Charlottesville.
Yeah, America's obsession with these statues of men who did atrocious things is, on the one hand, or I should say rather this way, for one, it's ridiculous and I don't get it. We should be lifting up people that were unequivocally good, right? This is why, Like, somebody stupidly, because this is a stupid thing to, like, they were talking about, well, what about all these religious icons, all these like saints and all this, Mary and different. I'm like, that is not the same.
Yeah.
Mary didn't systematically murder Black Union soldiers like Nathan Bedford Forrest did, but he has a bust in the Tennessee State Capitol right now that Republican lawmakers continue to fight for.
Yeah.
We knocked down the Edward Carmack one 3 weeks ago during the protests, but the bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest still meets the gaze of every person that walks into the state capitol today, 2020, June 19, 2020.
Yep.
That to me is inconceivable, and I don't understand why all Americans can't agree that we should just knock them all down tomorrow, like today, not tomorrow, today. And it speaks to how much work we have to do, Larycia. Mm-hmm. Like it speaks to, before we even started recording, I talked about like my desire to move back overseas and just, kind of be done with America. But and there's that constant tension of, okay, that's a fine decision. A lot of people expatriate and it's fine and it's good. And they're probably much more mentally healthy than some of us that stay here. There are some wonderful, wonderful places to live out there that are just beautiful. And, they live in more, no society is 100% equitable, but more equitable societies. But I keep coming back to, we have a lot of work to do. And there are many of us that, like you said, and I'm the same way, I can't unsee injustices. So I think it's incumbent upon us. And you have a different, I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's greater or different, but you have a different responsibility than I have, because this is directly in your bloodline. Me as a Latino, I've got different bloodline, different shit that happened to us. My dad came here as an immigrant and a refugee when he was a kid, and I've got all that to work through. But very close to things that are happening right now, like you have this very like in front of your face, like shit to deal with, because it's your, not just your ancestors and stuff you have to deal with, like, oh, this happened 50, 60 years ago, Jim Crow era, or 400 years ago. No, your brothers and sisters are being murdered right this very moment, like right now, because of their race, because of the color of their skin, because of the neighborhoods they grew up in as a result of, we've already talked about the preschool to prison pipeline, redlining, systematic disadvantages in terms of income and, equality. Like all these things attribute to why certain people are in the places they're in when these things happen, right? Like it's all organized. Like I can't believe any white American saying systemic racism is not a thing now because X, Y, and Z were abolished or they're unlawful now. That's not how it works. Shit stays. It stays, and it still runs through, different rules and regulations for neighborhoods and why people can have a job here, not have a job here, why they can go to school here, not go to school here. It's all very much still happening. And so I don't mean to keep like perpetuating these things, but I think I'm spending, I'm going to 2 podcasts a week right now because there's so many conversations to have. And I want to spend a lot of the time right now giving the time to Black leaders to say their piece and to share their stories and to kind of, I don't want to, at the very beginning of all this, post George Floyd's public lynching in Minneapolis a few weeks ago, I very blatantly said over and over again, white people don't expect Black people to instruct you. They are tired. They are worn out. They've already done the work. There are thousands of lectures and podcasts and movies and TED Talks and books and poems. They're all out there. So go do your fucking homework. It's out there already. But I do think for those of us that have been given a platform like I have on this show, I want to continue to find, great voices such as yourself to like kind of, give the platform to for an hour or two to kind of talk through these things, because we are far from over. This is not over. If we're still fighting against the injustices that Martin Luther King Jr. was fighting against, and he was still fighting against the same things that the Harriet Tubmans of the world were fighting against, in previous generations. Like in some ways I feel like I saw this very iconic photo of an old Black woman in Selma, Alabama, 1965, holding a sign that said, "Stop police brutality. And now in 2020, we're holding the same fucking signs.
Yeah.
Therefore, henceforth, the needle hasn't moved enough. We've got work to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful. As we kind of wrap up here, I have one more question for you, but I'm just grateful that you and others are giving me and the Let's Give a Damn family the time to kind of share your story and to encourage us, because it's very apparent that you not only give a damn, but also have a lot to teach us as
Thank you.
Yeah, as Let's Give a Damn family and the wider audience that will hear this once we put it out.
Thanks for elevating and amplifying Black voices, because yeah, we've been doing the teaching, but as you said, most white people have never purposely submitted themselves to the authority of a Black perspective, voice, whether academically, economically, in their work situation or otherwise, which is why choosing to submit to the authority of Black voices, but also authority in your workplace and houses of worship or community groups, sororities, fraternities, like whatever things that you exist in, and even cognizing the lack of that presence in some of your our organizations, right? I think is really important. So I hope that Let's Give a Damn goes, like what you're doing, I'm sure will go a long way towards people having those epiphanies about the importance of who they're listening to and who they're not, and thinking about, well, why is that? Have I done this on purpose? And some of that goes back to the systemic. The system is set up to not amplify our voices, to not have them at all. And so I think it's an important corrective. So thanks for doing that. And I honor your efforts.
Thank you. That's a wonderful place to stop for now. I hope we can do this again sometime, different conversation, different context. I hope to meet you someday. I really do. You're doing incredible work.
Thank you.
And again, thank you for joining us today. This was wonderful.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you. Thanks for the invitation.
That's the show today, friends. Huge thanks, huge shout out to Larycia Hawkins for joining me on the show. And thank you all for listening. And remember, from June 1 through July 31, you get 20% off your first purchase at redkap.com with the promo code GIVEADAMN. I created this show. Chad Snavely produced it. Let's Give a Damn is part of the Matter Media family. I am sending so much love and peace to each one of you right now. Stay safe. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.